So we can go one step further. All we know are ideas which work in systems with logical interrelations. Two ideas are important here. One is the notion of interrelationships, and the other is logical interrelationships. That is, the relationship between the concept of a parent and the concept of a child isn't an arbitrary relationship. It's a reciprocal relationship. There's something logical about this relationship. It isn't arbitrary. It isn't haphazard. If we had the concept of the child, we understood the child, we would need the concept of the parent. It's only logical. It is implied. You might say that parents are implied in children, or something parental, something guiding, something nurturing, something protecting. So, what else? This. All we know are ideas which work in systems with logical interrelations requiring some level of intellectual discipline. Why? Because if the ideas are logically related to each other, then you could make a mistake about their connections. If they have no logic to them, if they're just BBs in a bag, well, you can arrange them any way you want. You are not constrained. You are not required to respect what is inherent in them. And if you grant that intellectual discipline is involved, then you will find that you cannot escape without presupposing intellectual criteria and standards. Now, this is a fundamental idea, then, that what we know is logical. It's connected with ideas. These ideas are interrelated, and they presuppose the capacity to assess and to judge. Now, let me get at that idea. I don't know how intuitive it may be to you at the moment, but let me give you a couple of examples which I wrote down earlier. And this is meant simply to stimulate your intuition. You miss the logic of dancing if you think all you need to be able to do is put your feet in the right places on a diagram. You miss the logic of driving if you think all you have to do is obey traffic signals. You miss the logic of love if you think people you love must always agree with you. You miss the logic of experience if you think that point of view does not play a role. You miss the logic of tennis if you think it's just people hitting a ball up and back in a box. You miss the logic of chess if you think it's just people pushing figures on colored squares. You miss the logic of curriculum if you think it's just a matter of listing things that would be good to know. You miss the logic of teaching and learning if you say, any questions? No, good, then we can go on. And you miss the logic of memory if you think rote achieves it. Now, I'm not concerned with the correctness of those judgments, but the way in which each one attempts to show that there is such a thing as to get the logic of it and such a thing as to miss the logic of it. And that what we attempt to understand and know, in fact, has a logic. Look at this diagram for a moment. Take a very simple idea, the idea of dog. We've all experienced a dog. Very simple idea. You'd think, well, you just look and now you know what a dog is. But actually, the concept of a dog is quite complicated. There are many ideas involved in the logic of a dog, what a dog is. For example, if it's a dog, then it will bark rather than mew. And we know that. It will wag its tail when pleased. It will growl when irritated. It will be unable to fly. It will have paws rather than feet. And it will be carnivorous. Now, these are all implied in my concept of a dog, and many, many other things as well. So much that we could spend the rest of the day simply deducing what follows from the expression, this is a dog. And so again, this makes the point that to know anything is to know a system of ideas. Now, I want to diverge just a little bit here and ask you to reflect with me on this question. Is this the way students look at it? And I think fundamentally not. I think fundamentally students think that there are bits and pieces of knowledge, that you can pick them up independent of each other, and that if you remember what was said in the textbook, then you know something, and that something pretty much stands by itself. In fact, Bloom's taxonomy, if you're familiar with that, encourages that by calling recall knowledge. If you know Bloom's taxonomy, it says the first level of learning is knowledge, and then after that comes comprehension. So presumably you could know something you didn't understand, that you couldn't apply, that you couldn't analyze, that you couldn't synthesize, that you couldn't evaluate, but you could still know it. This is wrong. Bloom has mistook the knowledge, the logic of knowledge for the logic of recall. That is, he's put knowledge in place of recall, because if you read closely what is said, you'll see that what is being talked about is nothing other than recall. And I put it to you, recall is not knowledge. Or if it is knowledge, it is a very, very low level of knowledge. Now, what happens when students begin to get the idea that knowledge, when you have it, gives you logical implications? Students will begin to be able to reason in ways like this, although I'm not necessarily saying this is good reasoning. There could be flaws in this reasoning, but what it shows is a mind that is sensitive to logical implications and connections. This is a wooden table. The child sees that the table is wooden and then says, therefore there are trees. That's what this little sign means. And if there are trees, there must be sunlight. And if there is sunlight, there must be stars. And if there are stars, there must be a solar system. Therefore, if there is at least one wooden table, there must be at least one solar system. Now, I'll put it to you that very rarely do you hear students doing anything like this. In fact, rarely do you ever hear them use the word therefore. That is, thinking, looking for logical connections is not what students presently are doing. And so what we want to do is to give them this paradigm. Give them the sense that all we know is interconnected with everything else we know. And if you begin to understand one thing well, you're on your way to understanding many, many other things. There is a poem by, is it Tennyson or Browning? Flower in the Crannied Wall? Tennyson? It goes something like this. Flower in the crannied wall, I pluck thee out of thy crannies. If I could understand thee, root and all in all, I should understand what God and man is. Poem ends. And the idea is, if you can understand one thing thoroughly, you would understand everything. Or to put it go back to the concept of a dog. To understand a dog, you end up having to understand biology and medicine and evolution, and the circles, if you keep following them, burgeon outward in many directions. We want students to be able to have this insight. Give me ideas. Give me any ideas. And with those ideas, I can do the following thing. I can make statements and I can ask questions. Give me statements and questions, and I can seek reasons and evidence to determine whether those statements are correct or incorrect, justified or not justified, answerable or not answerable. Give me reasons and evidence, and I can begin to assess them to determine whether they're acceptable or not. Therefore, give me some ideas, and I can begin to explore the nature of things. That is, they begin to see that ideas are tools for understanding things. Ideas can be used to pose questions. They can be used to figure things out and to be checked out at the same time.